I was 27 and lived near a bunch of hills in the south part of West Virginia, close to where the hills turn into big mountains. For a long time, I've loved going outside and walking around in the wild, climbing up hills and mountains. Sometimes I'd camp out for a night or more. My close buddy Mike, who lived just down the road from my house, would usually come with me when I decided to go on these trips. Every year, when the leaves changed colors and the weather got a bit cooler, Mike and I would pick a special spot to hike to and camp. This could be for just a few nights or even for an entire week. In 2019, we picked a path that would take us over the hills and up to a tiny pond located high up in the mountains. But just a couple of days before we were supposed to leave, Mike told me he couldn't come. Something urgent had come up at his job. I had already told my job that I wouldn't be coming in that week, and I had my backpack and all my gear set up and ready to go. So I thought, why not just go by myself? That Monday, I woke up early, packed my car, and drove to the start of the path I had picked. This path wasn't like the usual paths people walked on for short trips. The paths I liked didn't really look like paths at all. Instead, you'd use a map, a tool to show you which way was north, and you'd look for big things like huge rocks to know you were going the right way. You'd walk to one big rock, and from there you'd be able to see the next spot you needed to get to. I walked and walked for 2 whole days. I was trying to get to a high spot on a hill. When it started to get dark on day 2, I figured I'd stop and set up my camp. I'd continue my walk the next day. I put up my small sleeping tent and started a fire to keep warm. I then took out some food from my bag, heated it up, and had a nice meal. After eating, I went into my tent. Even though the sky was dark, I could still see because of the fire I had started. I decided to relax and read my book for a little bit. I figured I'd put out the fire before I went to sleep. I was only reading for a short while when I heard a loud sound. It sounded like someone or something had stepped on a big branch right behind where I was sleeping. I quickly stood up, thinking that maybe it was a bear that had smelled my food. I waited, listening, but there was no other noise. Slowly, I got out of my tent and used my light to look around, especially in the woods behind me. I couldn't see anything. I even yelled out, thinking that if it was an animal, my loud voice might make it run away. But everything was silent. It was really weird because I was sure I had heard something. The noise of the branch breaking was very clear. Feeling a bit nervous, I stayed up for a little longer, checking around to make sure everything was okay. Eventually, I turned off my fire and decided to try and get some sleep. It was super hard for me to close my eyes and sleep that night. Every tiny noise made my heart race. When morning came, I was surprised I had managed to get any sleep at all. I quickly packed up everything and started walking again. I wanted to get to the top of the hill and see that little pond. When I finally got there, it was just an hour or so before it was going to get dark again. The pond was super pretty, with clear water reflecting the sky. I decided to set up my camp again near the trees by the pond. As I was sitting and warming myself by the campfire, I kept hearing weird noises. It kind of sounded like someone walking slowly. I kept telling myself it was probably just animals, but it felt creepy. It felt like someone was watching me, but every time I looked around, I didn't see anyone. I thought maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me because it was getting dark. Finally, I went into my tent and tried to sleep again, but those soft, slow footsteps kept coming back. Every once in a while, I'd hear them. Then, suddenly, it sounded like someone running away really fast. I jumped up, scared. I grabbed my flashlight and quickly ran out of my tent, pointing the light everywhere. I just saw a hint of someone running far away. My heart was pounding super fast. When I looked around my camp, I saw footprints that weren't mine. It looked like someone had been sneaking around my tent and checking out my stuff. I got my fire going again because I wanted to see everything clearly. I was super scared and didn't know what to do. I felt all alone and helpless. I sat by the fire for the rest of the night, looking everywhere, listening to every sound. But nothing else happened. When the sun came up, I took a couple of pictures of the pond. It was so pretty, but I didn't feel safe anymore. so I started walking back home even though I had wanted to stay longer. While I was walking, I checked my backpack and noticed that some of my stuff was gone. Things like snacks and small tools, but I always had my backpack with me. The only time I didn't see it was when I was asleep. Now, I can't stop thinking about that night. Was that person sneaking into my tent and taking stuff from my bag? Even thinking about it gives me goosebumps. In the small town where I lived, I always enjoyed spending time outside, especially when the weather began to cool down and the trees turned different shades of red, orange, and yellow. There's something about that time of year that makes me feel alive. So when my good buddy, whom I'll name Jack, suggested we should go camping to celebrate his upcoming birthday, I was all in. We were always up for an adventure. We quickly gathered our tents, sleeping bags, and other essential supplies, and made our way to a quiet forest spot that Jack's family had been visiting since he was a kid. It was one of those places where you felt miles away from the rest of the world. With the sound of our footsteps as the only noise, we trekked our way to the campsite. There was something comforting about being surrounded by nature and feeling disconnected from the daily hustle and bustle. After a quick walk, which felt more like a pleasant stroll, we reached our spot. We got to work, setting up our tents and getting the campfire area ready. It was teamwork at its finest, and we had everything sorted in no time. With our campsite looking like something out of a magazine, Jack suggested we should explore the area a bit more. Eager for a mini-adventure, we headed deeper into the woods. Walking without any particular direction, we stumbled upon an old, faint trail. This was strange because, according to Jack, he had never seen or heard about it despite the countless times he'd been here. Our curiosity piqued and we followed the trail, which meandered through dense trees and led us to an old wooden cabin. The cabin looked like it had seen better days. Its paint was chipping, and the windows were shattered. Jack, always the adventurous one, wanted to take a look inside. I was a little wary, but my adventurous side got the better of me. The interior was dusty, with cobwebs in every corner. It was evident that the cabin had been untouched for a long time. We browsed around, hoping to find some old relic or even a diary that would give us some history about the cabin. As we were preparing to head out, I spotted something unusual. A small door, almost hidden, stood in the corner, with an ancient-looking padlock holding it shut. Jack saw my eyes fixated on the door, and soon his eyes mirrored my intrigue. We looked at the padlock, its age evident from the rust covering it. For some reason, we felt the need to find out what was behind it. I gave the door a gentle tap. I knew it was silly, but I wanted to be sure there wasn't anything, or anyone inside. Jack, being resourceful, went out and came back holding a sturdy rock. Handing it to me, he gestured towards the lock. With adrenaline pumping, I took the rock, and after a few solid strikes, the rusted padlock gave way. The door creaked as we slowly began to open it. The door groaned as we slowly opened it, its hinges protesting loudly. Darkness engulfed the space ahead, making it impossible to see further. Jack flashed his torch into the room, revealing an old staircase leading downwards. I could see the apprehension in his eyes, but our curiosity got the best of us. We convinced ourselves that no one had been around this area for a long time, so what harm could there be in taking a quick look? I took the first step, with Jack right behind me, the wood beneath our feet creaking with every move. The descent was short, maybe about 10 steps, and then we found ourselves in a room. The sight in front of us was unsettling. There were several neat mattresses, looking surprisingly new, scattered across the dusty floor. Some random pieces of furniture lay around, all of which looked much too modern for the old, decaying cabin. A chill ran down my spine. We had expected to find old remnants of the past, not something that looked like it was from just a few years back. Without uttering a word, we scrambled back up the stairs. We pushed the door closed, trying to shut out the haunting sight we had just witnessed. Catching our breath, we began speculating about the eerie room. Could it have been a hideout? Or maybe it was some secret spot that locals knew about? As we were deep in thought, Jack suddenly motioned for me to be silent. I strained my ears and heard faint footsteps approaching. Panic set in. What if someone saw us at the cabin? But to our relief, the footsteps continued past, not pausing even for a moment. It was clear. Whoever it was knew about the cabin and chose to ignore it. Once we were certain they were gone, we made a beeline for our camp, packed up, and hurried back to Jack's house. We felt it was important to inform the police about our discovery. Upon reaching his home, we called the local authorities. We shared our concerns and told them about the unexpected items in the room. Their arrival and subsequent search of the cabin didn't yield any conclusive evidence, but the strangeness of the situation was evident to them as well. Word about the cabin spread like wildfire in our community. Everyone had a theory, from it being a secret hideaway to it being involved in some sinister activities. Considering the buzz, and to prevent more people from snooping around, the town decided to demolish the cabin. Even today, the mystery of the cabin remains unsolved. And deep down, I can't shake off the feeling that something dark and twisted transpired in that cabin. Every summer when I was a little kid, my big family always planned a camping trip. I would look forward to it all year long. Why? Well, I lived in a dry place, Arizona, where there were mostly just sandy areas and cacti. The camping trips, though, were in a beautiful place in Washington with big trees, green grass, and fresh air. But the best part? I got to hang out with all my cousins. We didn't get to see each other often, maybe once or twice a year, so these trips were special. Among all my cousins, I had a favorite, Tom. Tom was a year older than me, and every time we met, we were like two peas in a pod. We were as thick as thieves. But one camping trip changed things between us. It made our bond even stronger. Why? Because something scary happened that we couldn't forget. 2 days into this particular trip, while the adults and other kids were enjoying themselves near the lake or chit-chatting around the campfire, Tom and I decided to play in the woods. Tom wasn't a big fan of swimming, so we opted to play a game of cops and robbers among the trees. It's a simple game. One of us is a cop, and the other is a robber. The cop chases the robber, and the game continues. As we played, we ran further and further into the woods. With all the trees around, it's really easy to lose your way, and that's exactly what happened. Especially when Tom started chasing me with a big stick he found. I ran faster, scared he might catch me, and after what felt like hours, I stumbled upon an old trailer. Tom wasn't far behind, and when he arrived, we both stood still, staring at the trailer that seemed like it had been there for ages. We thought about checking it out, but something in our gut told us not to. Instead, we tried to find our way back to our campsite. As we were walking, a man and a woman, who we had never seen before, appeared from a path, pushing a shopping cart full of random items. The lady with a smile on her face walked up to us and began asking questions. "Are you guys lost? Where's your family? What are your names? How old are you?" When we shared our age, her eyes darted to the man behind her and then back to us. Her offer was simple. "Don't worry, kids. We'll help you find your family. But first, let's go to our camp. You can even have some s'mores." We were young and naive. In our minds, bad people only came out at night, so we thought it was safe to go with them since it was still daytime. But as we followed them, something felt off. I peeked into their cart and saw a weird collection of old metal things. Nothing seemed new. It was all just random junk. A strange feeling began to grow in my stomach, and when I looked over at Tom, I could tell he was feeling the same way. Every time I glanced at the man, I noticed that he wasn't smiling at all. In fact, sometimes he was just staring with a weird, empty expression. Even now, many years later, I can't forget that eerie look on his face. We kept on walking, and soon that old trailer we saw earlier appeared again. The lady seemed more cheerful and said, "Are you boys ready for some yummy s'mores?" Just then, I heard voices calling out for Tom and me. The woman paused. her grip on our hands growing stronger. I could hear her whispering something to the man, but I couldn't make out the words. Suddenly, she tried to pull us towards the trailer, walking faster than before. I felt scared and tried to look around for help. Luckily, I spotted my sister nearby through the gaps in the trees. Without a second thought, I shouted her name, and the woman instantly let go. Tom and I didn't waste any time. We ran straight to my sister, who was quickly approaching. When she reached us, she called out to the rest of our family to tell them she'd found us. As everyone gathered, the couple spun a story about how they were just trying to help us find our way back. They said we were such good kids and were only trying to do the right thing. My parents, relieved to see us, thanked the couple. They even invited them to join us for a meal. To my relief, the couple declined the offer. Even though the lady had acted friendly, my dad and my uncle whispered to each other about how off-putting the man seemed. Tom and I tried telling my sister that the two strangers had acted strangely, but I don't think she really got what we were trying to say. As the years went by and we grew older, Tom and I realized the possible danger we had been in. We talked about that day and thought that maybe, given their appearance and behavior, they might have been in a tough spot and were planning something bad for us. I kept this memory to myself for so long. I didn't want my family to see me as weak. Tom felt the same way, especially since he was older and thought he should have protected me better. Finally, a few years back, we shared our concerns with our parents. I sometimes wish we told them sooner. Perhaps they could have done something about it. Now, with kids of my own, I always keep a close eye on them. I remind them often that they can share anything with me and I won't judge. I especially emphasize this to my son,